To say it's been an interesting couple of weeks on the international stage would be something of an understatement. You had the Ukrainians launch a truly amazing covert operation that succeeded in, let's just check my notes, neutralizing roughly a third of Russia's nuclear bombers. You also had Russia passing the million casualty mark in its invasion of Ukraine, which again is just staggering when you think about it. And of course, we had Israel's kind of surprise attack. I say kind of because we all knew something was going to happen sooner or later, notionally aimed at neutralizing that country's nuclear program, but in actual fact, also doing a pretty good job of also destroying its air defenses at the same time. And of course, that was followed by Iran's response of lobbing long range ballistic missiles and drones at Israel. For the airheads out there, of course, there was also the likely end of the last possibly operational F 14s destroyed by Israeli bombing. But all of these have been kind of eclipsed by an even bigger event. The United States launching direct attacks upon the Iranian nuclear facilities at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, all with the stated aim of ending Iranian attempts to develop an atomic weapon. And this is probably the biggest deal to occur on the international stage since certainly the invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and arguably since September 2001. At 2:30 in the morning local time on June 22nd, the United States Air Force and Navy launched coordinated strikes on the three previously mentioned nuclear facilities under the operational name of Midnight Hammer. It was quite an effort. The strike utilized 30 Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from a US submarine that targeted both Isfahan and Natanz, while two GBU 57 massive ordnance penetrators (MOPs) were also dropped on Natanz by a United States Air Force B 2 Spirit stealth bomber. In addition to this, 12 MOPs were dropped on the Fordow nuclear facility by 6 B 2s. To undertake this mission, the Spirits, staging out of their home base at Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, were in the air for 37 continuous hours, requiring extensive aerial tanker support. Additionally, reports are that other B 2s were used as decoys operating over the Pacific to distract Iranian intelligence, meaning that a substantial part of the entire fleet of B 2s was employed, as there are thought to only be 19 of these aircraft operational. The B 2s were escorted by substantial numbers of other US aircraft to ensure that the Iranian air defences, which admittedly had been smashed up pretty thoroughly by the recent Israeli actions, did not interfere. The use of the GBU 57 marks the first time this weapon has been used in combat and was necessary because of the type of target it was used against. In short, the two Iranian facilities hit with MOPs are buried deep underground, with the Fordow fuel enrichment plant essentially being built beneath a small mountain. The GBU 57 is literally the only conventional weapon capable of possibly destroying a target like Fordow, hence its usage. The MOP is a GPS guided weapon that weighs between 12 and 13 tons, depending on the variant, of which something like 2 tons is the explosive filler. Built from high-density steel alloy, the MOP is designed to be dropped from high altitude, then punched through up to 60 metres, around 200 feet, of earth and rock, or 18 metres, 60 feet, of concrete to destroy very hardened targets. Targets just like Fordow. In fact, the United States is basically the only country in the world with this capacity, as was spelt out by President Trump when he gave a briefing to the press after the strike. In that, Trump said,
"Tonight I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated."
Expert opinion is still unsure as to the actual success of the strikes, as the Fordow plant in particular is so deep that at this time it is impossible to assess from available satellite shots how extensive the damage to the facility may be. Reactions from the international community have been mixed, with America's allies generally adopting the line that Iran should be prevented from acquiring nuclear weapons, but also advocating for negotiations between the respective parties to reduce conflict. They have also generally expressed the opinion that, following further comments from President Trump on the possibility of provoking a regime change in Iran, that this would be an extremely risky move, as the chaos caused by similar efforts on other countries in the region is a warning against such meddling. Whether such warnings are heeded, we'll have to wait and see, but certainly Russia, effectively one of Iran's one few allies, has been extremely critical of the attack, with the Russian Foreign Ministry saying that the irresponsible decision to subject the territory of a sovereign state to missile and bomb attacks, whatever the arguments it may be presented with, flagrantly violates international law, the Charter of the United Nations, and the resolutions of the United Nations Security Council. Which leads me to conclude that irony is indeed dead. China also reacted with condemnation for America's actions, though they are likely more motivated by their own energy concerns and the issues that may arise from an Iranian response. The People's Republic is thought to import a substantial quantity of their oil from Iran, perhaps as much as 80 to 90% of what Iran exports, which is estimated to be between 1.3 and 1.8 million barrels a day that the Chinese take. Roughly speaking, China is estimated to need to import around 7.5 million barrels a day to maintain their current consumption, and this comes mainly from Iran and the Arab Gulf states. The Iranian parliament has already voted to close the Straits of Hormuz in retaliation to America's attack, and this narrow channel at the mouth of the Gulf sees about 20% of global shipping passing through daily, most of which is composed of the oil tankers that keeps the world's economy working. Closing the straits does not particularly threaten the United States' own oil supply, as they can mainly meet their own needs. But it does represent a significant problem for China and a number of important American allies, such as Japan, South Korea, and several European countries who rely on Gulf oil supplies for their energy needs. All of this has caused oil prices to shoot up, and that will ultimately impact the global economy on the big stage, as well as hitting the individual purchaser with higher prices at the pumps. All issues that are liable to place pressure on the US president. The Iranians have spent years preparing for the possibility of blockading Hormuz, and if you want to know more about their capabilities to do so, their naval expert H.I. Sutton has a briefing on YouTube that I shall link to at the end and also in the description, so be sure to check that out. As to whether Iran does decide to enforce a blockade of the Straits, well, that is still a big question. Such a move would further erode their own fractured economy, but if the Iranian authorities think they face extinction because of the US and Israeli air offensive, nothing is likely to be off the table. Of course, if they do try to enforce a blockade, either with mines or missiles, they'd likely invite heavy retaliation from the US and from the Gulf Arab states, who have their own axes to grind with Iran and pretty substantial militaries in their own right. Aside from closing Hormuz, other potential responses from Iran against the United States, which they have loudly promised, are attacks on American troops stationed in the Middle East, or else encouraging their proxies in Iraq to attack US targets. There is also the very real possibility of the Iranians attempting to take action within the US itself, as the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Council has a long track record of undertaking operations in foreign countries, and it should probably be assumed that they have agents within the United States. Mind you, given the current situation in the US in terms of the amount of attention that certain agencies are giving to, should we just say, persons who may be foreign, well, it may prove a more difficult operational theatre for covert operations than generally is the case. Plus, I think we can safely say that any action conducted by Iran on US soil would garner a really violent response. I feel also we should address an idea that has been widely pronounced on social media of the possibility of actual American troops deploying to Iran. I say this now, the chances of that happening must be vanishingly small, because any sort of invasion of Iran would make the invasion and occupation of Iraq look like a cakewalk. Seriously, the USA does not have the strength to undertake such an operation, certainly without massive local support. Mind you, the way the year is shaping up, never say never, eh? The final consideration to think about is the implications this all has on domestic US politics. Trump has been vocal for years on his criticism of former presidents and their engagement in military actions. Indeed, No More Forever Wars was effectively one of his campaign slogans for re-election. This action must therefore be seen as quite a gamble, as the prospect of a long drawn-out fight with Iran is a possibility. and that has already caused some of his public supporters to turn on him, notably Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene. How much impact it has on his base support? Well, that remains to be seen, but likely depends on what happens over the next few days and how the situation develops. Actually, I do have one final note. For all those out there who are advocating for drones over manned aircraft, yeah, I think you can give that one a rest for the moment. You're not quite there, and this operation all proves that. Thanks, folks. Have a good one, and I'll catch you next time.